Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to today's video. Before we dive into the interview, I'm gonna take a quick second and ask a favor. If you enjoy learning more about ways to improve your life, health, wellness, fitness, nutrition, and mindset, go ahead and tap that subscribe button, all right? Make sure you never miss another power-packed episode here of Ever Forward Radio. But speaking of, we have a power-packed interview for you today. We got Navy SEAL and new author, Rich Diviney. We're gonna be diving into his works from The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance. Now, we're not gonna be going into all 25. You gotta check out the book for the rest, but Rich breaks down what it means to be a qualified leader, qualified human being in the military, in the civilian world, in corporate life. No matter where you go, if you have these attributes that you can fall back on to help guide your course, then, well, you're on the path to what I say it takes to be living a life ever forward. But before we do, I'm gonna give a shout out to today's sponsor. Thank you so much to Legion Athletics. Whether you're looking for a grass-fed whey that is lactose-free, so it's easy on the stomach, things that are third-party lab tested, things that include no proprietary blends, no artificial flavors, sweeteners. If you're looking for the #1 all-natural supplements brand in the world, well, then Legion Athletics is your choice. It's mine. It has been for quite a while now. If you want to save 20% off of your first order, make sure to head to buylegion.com and you can get 20% off of your entire first purchase by simply using our checkout code EverForward when you're done. Then, when you come back, throw down the checkout code EverForward every time so you get double loyalty points towards even more savings. That's buylegion.com, checkout code EverForward to save 20%. Thank you, Legion. Thank you, Rich. Thank you for tuning in. Let's go ahead and jump into today's interview.
Hey, I'm Rich Diviney. Today I'm going to talk about my new book, The Attributes, the 25 Drivers of Optimal Performance, and you're going to discover what actually drives your behavior, especially during times of challenge, uncertainty, and stress, and get some tools and tips on how to do better in those environments. So hope you enjoy. Welcome to Ever Forward Radio.
3, 2, 1.
Rich, what's up, man? Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Not every day I get to have a Navy SEAL in the house, so
Yeah,
welcome.
yeah.
Obviously, we're Team Whoop here as well.
We are,
Excellent.
yes.
You know what? You can't see mine. I went with the camo class.
I know.
So
I know. Although there's no jungle here, so
I guess you can take the guy out of the Army, but not the Army green. Right?
That's right, yeah.
Lone green forever.
right.
Well, what a privilege to have you here. Thank you again so much.
Yeah.
I always enjoy sitting down with my veteran community, and someone like yourself has done it for a long time.
Yep.
Super high speed, all the things. I guess first question before we kind of get into the crux of your new work and your new book, why the military?
Yeah.
I still have a big military following, and I get this question all the time. Which branch should I choose? Is it right for me? How did you know it was right for you?
I didn't. It's funny. Unlike you, we had no family in the military. So I have a twin brother. I grew up in Connecticut. I have an older sister, a twin brother, and a younger brother. And my dad was a private pilot, so we used to go flying on the weekends. And my twin brother and I just fell in love with aviation, at a very young age. And so we quickly decided we should be jet pilots. And so it was either the Air Force or the Navy. But we kind of, as we read every book we could and got all the pictures and all the posters on the wall, we realized that the Navy guys land on ships. I was like, man, that's pretty cool. That's pretty hard. So let's do that. But yeah, literally one of my favorite books as growing up as a kid was Chuck Yeager's autobiography, Yeager, which is just an awesome book.
Can't go wrong with that.
No,
Yeah.
And so we were just aviation minded. We wanted to be Navy pilots even before Top Gun came out, and then just were bent on that. And so as we got to college, went to Purdue. I got into ROTC, and learned about. Prior to college, I learned about the SEALs because the first Gulf War in '90. Just after that, an article had come out, and it was about all the spec ops units in the military. Marine Force Recon, Green Berets, SEALs, Rangers.
Yeah, my dad was a Persian Gulf vet.
Yeah. So and the spec ops were used a little bit, but not that much. In fact, I think the article was saying how they weren't used too much.
Right.
But the article was kind of highlighting how they were used and how they actually gained some notoriety with military commanders during that war, as short as it was. But anyway, the picture was peppered with photographs of guys in different environments, and guy in the snow, guy in the jungle, guy in the desert, underwater. And what I realized is most of the pictures were seals. They were in all these environments, and I was like, that's pretty cool. And they were from the water, which I was also growing up in Connecticut. I was a water rat. I loved everything about the water, being in it, under it, whatever.
So it was all just coming together for you.
Yeah, well, it definitely was. It was spiking my interest, And then you read about the training, how it's really, really hard and difficult, and things like that. And I don't know if I was excited about that. I was kind of like, okay. But it was ultimately when I was at Purdue in ROTC getting ready to service select that I said to myself, I did not want to be a pilot and look over at the SEALs and wonder if I could do it. And so I selected SEALs, and fortunately I got picked up and then made it to training. And then that was in '96, and then spent the next 20 plus years in a very kinetic time frame, right? Serving Iraq and Afghanistan, all these other places. And I don't know. I'm just grateful to have done it. Learned a lot about myself. Learned a lot about behavior, performance. Learned, develop friendships that'll last forever.
Yeah.
And then got out, and I've been doing leadership in high performing teams and things like that since then. But the military for me was a means to an end. I think my brother ended up being a Marine, and he flew Harriers.
I'm sorry to hear that.
But he was a pilot, right? So,
okay.
But he was flying the jump jet, which is kind of
amazing.
Cool. Yeah. So for both of us, it was a means to do something we really were interested in doing. And of course, as you go into that environment, you learn things that you didn't otherwise think you would. Yeah. And I think most good, some bad, but it's certainly a nice way of life in terms of giving you a lot of experience and life experience that you otherwise might not have gotten. So,
yeah, that's one of the things that I look back on my military career, and a lot of things on paper or top of mind directly translate.
Right.
This skill set in the military translate to this skill set in the civilian workforce or just back in the real world kind of thing. But a lot of that doesn't. And I mean, I've been out now for 10 years. I was 03 to 09. There we go.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's still now 10 years later. I just uncover things, or things hit me in the face of like, wow, actually that transition was more difficult than I thought. The translation from soldier to civilian, military to civilian was more difficult than I thought. And 10 years later, I'm still kind of trying to wrap my head around some things. And all the time in my audience, it's like, hey, Chase, do you struggle with this? Or when you got out, was it hard? How long have you been out now?
4 years.
4 years. Okay. So as someone who has transitioned out 4 years fresh back to a civilian after serving 20 years, what has been your hardest transition moment, do you think? Or have you gotten to that yet?
Well, I think there's many, but here's what I think is the hardest for most military. And it's this idea that we are in the military, you're in an environment where a lot of stuff is taken care of for you, right? You don't have to worry about a lot of things, whether it be dental, medical, even uniforms, sometimes where you live, all that stuff. You don't have to worry about that. You also are always surrounded by people who are like, or well, I wouldn't say like because it's a very diverse, but at least going through the same thing you are. I believe, and it's a theory, but I think I've talked to enough of us to say it's a pretty well proven one, that the hardest part about transitions is we're going from being part of a group to being alone. And especially if you're someone who's
team to an individual.
Yeah. So especially if you're someone who's going into like an entrepreneur field, or even if you're going into a business that's just not related to military, it's you're jumping out of this kind of warm blanket of people who you can lean on, and
you're leaving that whoopee.
Yeah, it really is. And it's regardless of whether or not you get along or have a bunch of friends. You're just leaving a group of people who just, it's an environment that it's a certain environment, there's people with you. And so doing something on your own takes courage. And a lot of, veterans have that. I mean, so we just have to tap into that and understand that the reason why I think one of the reasons why there's a lot of trepidation for most of us is because we are suddenly alone. Yeah. And it feels that way. Yeah. It's not true. I mean, it's true to one extent, but we have to remember that we have to lean on our families, our friends, and things like that. But yes, you're going to have to march out into pastures by yourself. And when you look around you, there are not going to be a lot of people who are like you that you can lean on. So you can look at that as, I certainly looked at it as kind of an adventure, but there have been moments, and there still are moments, where I say to myself, man, this is hard. It's hard because I feel like I'm on my own, and I have to persevere.
Yeah, it's wild. Like I said, I've been out for 10 years. out for 4, I mean, I'm still uncovering things that like, oh, well, I am kind of struggling. It's wild. So it sounds like your transition is doing really well. And I always wonder if the longer you serve, I mean, I guess what I like to say is my transition out was not my choice.
Right.
It was just the cards I was dealt due to injuries. And someone like who I know goes through 20 years, actually it's funny timing. If I had stuck in, my original plan was to do the 20 and retire. Mm-hmm. I quite literally, like this month or this summer, would be beginning my retirement. I would be beginning my transition out.
Right.
And so I always wonder, is it because the military does prepare you for, boot camp and training and specialty and selection school and whatever your path is, that transition in is a lot. And if you actually commit and you have that proper transition out, I always wonder, was I kind of shortchanged, or if people who actually go out on their terms, if that transition is actually in place, if they're better off, or can just have a different experience.
I certainly think the psychology of it matters, and I would offer that those folks who spend 20 plus years in the service have often done pretty much everything they wanted to do in the service, right? So, and I know as a SEAL, especially as a SEAL officer, I certainly did. I mean, by the time I retired, I was an 05 commander.
Wow.
Almost at 06, and I, the next jobs, although interesting, were not necessarily SEAL-ish, right? They were more in charge or even staff, or and so I knew I had done everything that I wanted to do, and I could get out with that satisfaction. In terms of are you more prepared? That's going to be up to the person, right? Some people, if you and I were to ask someone who started a career after college, right? Say working for, I don't know, Amazon, okay, and they started at the delivery room and moved all the way up over the course of 20 years to an executive position, a C-suite position.
Yeah.
And then you tell that person at 20 years, hey, do you want to leave Amazon and just go try something completely new? Most people are going to be like, "What?
Yeah, what do you mean new?"
Yeah, I mean you're literally jumping off the top of one mountain into the valley, so you can start climbing the next one. Now, for me, that's exciting. I like that idea. But no, that's not the case for everybody. And so that's why a lot of people getting out will try to find jobs that are still related to the military, civilian jobs that are related, and that's cool if you can do that. If you can't do that, we just have to recognize this is where the little bit of the loneliness and trepidation comes in. We're moving from something that it was complete certainty and predictability, and we had mastered, and we're diving into something brand new. Not very common when you think about how people think about their own career progression.
Truly.
So so it depends on the individual and how you look at that type of endeavor.
Yeah, military or civilian, anytime we go through a transition, I have found kind of solace or softens the blow, and going back to my familiarity, going back to my core values, attributes, and I know that's a lot of what your new work is about. And so, before we kind of get into the crux of that, could you maybe shine a light on one or two of your newfound attributes, or what you're here to talk about in terms of transition? What maybe one or two key attributes would best serve somebody transitioning military to civilian, the 20-year career from one job to retirement? Just transition as a whole is a lot.
Yeah.
What would somebody fall back on?
Yeah, I would say there's certainly a few of them. If I were to pick two that were, I think, the most important, one would be courage, which is the ability to step into what we fear and move forward. And that's what it takes if you're going to go from something like that to being by yourself or doing whatever. The next would be open-mindedness, because I
like that one.
Again, in the military, there's stringent kind of conditions and rules around almost everything.
A little bit,
right? And so people say, well, you're told how to think. No, you're not really told how to think, but the boundaries, rules, constraints kind of guide you into the way you think.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, and so when you get out, I think it's very important to maintain a sense of open-mindedness, which is it's different than curiosity in the sense I look at curiosity as an active, a proactive.
It's a process.
It's a process, and it's you kind of. It's a proactive thing, right? You're moving into it. Curiosity is I want to go look because I'm curious, right? Open-mindedness, it doesn't have to be that way. Open-mindedness can be completely passive. It's just a matter of opening up your aperture to make sure that you are effectively understanding and appreciating what you're seeing. And so a great example that I like to use is I say that coming out of the military, I had to get used to the concept of time in the civilian world, right? Because in the concept of time there's I'll go through three of them. There's the military concept of time. There's the SEAL concept of time, and then there's the civilian concept of time, right? The military concept of time is if you're not 15 minutes early, you're late, right?
To be early is to be on time. To be on time is to be late.
That's
to
right.
be late as well. Nice knowing you.
Nice knowing, right? So that's the military. The civilian concept of time is anywhere around start time in 15 minutes, you're fine, right?
Yeah.
The SEAL concept of time is plus or minus 30 seconds, right? And this is how we planned with our helicopters. Our helicopters used to say, hey, we will be there at this time plus or minus 30 seconds. Because if you're too early, that's bad. And if you're too late, that's bad, right? You're right on time. And so of course I joke because I did a tour in Hawaii, and in Hawaii they call it island time, which is one of the Hawaiians said island time is like any time this week, right? So
I've heard that. Yeah.
But so for me as someone who's used to SEAL time, I had to be very open-minded to the idea that civilian time was different, and the way people looked at time is different. Now, you can take that in a couple ways. One can look at that and it can stress them out, which it did me in some cases if I saw people just not responding the way I wanted them to respond. Or when I really made a proactive look at it, I said, or I can actually take this chance to relax a little bit, which is actually pretty good.
Flip it on its head a little bit.
Flip it on its head and say, hey, I actually can sit back and not worry about something for a little bit. Now it's not in my nature, so I'm always going to kind of over plan a little bit and kind of be there. But I can relax a little bit. But this is an idea of open-mindedness, and any of us who are coming out into this new world, where in many cases we've been coddled. People are like, military coddled. Well, in some cases you are, right? Open-mindedness and courage, I think, are the two most important. Yeah,
it's funny as you were describing those concepts of time. I have to kind of like laugh in my head to my point earlier of things that I'm realizing now, 10 years later, that I'm struggling still. It's that I kind of have and I'm wondering if anybody listening, now as the civilian can relate, coming from the military, is we kind of pass those expectations on to our peers, our coworkers, our significant others. And in my head, why wouldn't you be early to be on time? Why wouldn't you do these things? And it's really having to detach from that and recognize that's my training. Those are my parameters around it. It doesn't make it right or wrong with anybody else, but I would get so frustrated. Still, it's a big thing that I'm working on.
Yeah. No, I agree. And my wife and I joked about this. When I first met my wife, which was 5 years into my career, she was someone who really wasn't concerned with being on time. It didn't really bother her. And again, I was like, okay, that's fine. I mean, I love her, and this, it's okay. It was only when I actually, and this is to her real credit, when she once said to me, "Hey, why are you so concerned about whether I'm late or whatever?" And I said to her, listen, the way I see it, and again, my wife is one of the most empathetic people on the planet. She really cares about other people. I mean, deeply cares. And I said, the way I see it is that when I'm late, I'm wasting someone else's time. I'm actually doing them a disservice. I'm disrespecting them, and I'm making them wait for me. And I feel like that's both disrespecting them, and that's a little bit arrogant on my part. I mean, why should they do that? And as soon as I gave her that distinction, she was never late again, because she was able to absorb that into her own empathy and kind of say, okay, I get it, right? And so there's different ways you can look at that, but I think reframing and being open-minded is the key in for success in most cases, but certainly as we come out of the military.
It's funny, you joke with your wife. I joke with mine all the time. So I run on military time. My wife's Persian. She runs on Persian time. That's its own other thing. When you say like island time, I think island time and Persian time might almost be the same thing.
Yeah.
But I digress.
Yeah.
But these attributes that you talk about, I asked you a question, hey, can you give us 2 things to fall back on to aid with a transition? And you immediately had these things to fall back on. And I know you have a list of others. And this is something kind of ingrained in us in the military. We've got acronyms for days, for everything. We've got core values, at least in the Army. It was leadership, loyalty, duty, respect, self-service, honor, integrity, personal courage. That's actually pretty impressive. I'm
impressed. Yeah.
Wow. See, it's just drilled in.
Right.
So I had this to fall back on. A lot of other military people do. And in certain organizations, good leadership, I think, will also foster that community of maybe you get a clever acronym, but you get mission statement, you get attributes, you get things that the team, the individual can fall back on to remind them of your mission,
right?
To remind them of why you're here, to remind them of whatever you need, to take a step forward. Where did these come from you? Was it kind of what you saw lacking in your transition? Was it what you picked up from the Navy SEALs, or just things you learned in the civilian world? Where did these attributes come from?
Yeah, so it's a little bit more elemental than I think even values. In the book, I point to values as helping point to your attributes, but I think values are more of a description in terms of what you believe and kind of. And I think values encompass.
I would agree. Yeah. Okay.
Encompass a little bit more. I have been fascinated for quite a while with the elemental human, and what is that for me? That means okay, well, who shows up? As us, especially when chips are down. We always say, it's in challenge, stress, and uncertainty that the real person shows up. When you squeeze the orange, the juice comes out, or when you crush the coal, what's that diamond look like? Elemental human behavior for me begins at the attributes, and it's because these attributes are innate. They're qualities that we're born with, and we're born with levels of. Certainly, environments and as we learn and grow, they can be developed, but they inform our behavior, especially during times of challenge, stress, and uncertainty. And so I began to take a look at them. I was running a training and a selection assessment and training course for one of our specialized SEAL commands. And what we were doing when we were getting very experienced guys to come through this and getting about a 50% attrition, which is fine. You get attrition anyway.
Which is actually really good for the SEAls.
Well,
yeah, like an 80, 90%.
Well, that's at basic. Yeah, that's at basic.
Okay.
Yeah. So now you're talking about very experienced guys coming to this, and out of that group, 50% not making it.
Damn.
And so what we were unable to do in a satisfactory way was to articulate why that was. And what I found was we were falling back on explaining it via skills. We were using skills as excuses, like, hey, they couldn't shoot very well, couldn't do close quarter combat, couldn't,
Absolutely, yeah.
Couldn't skydive, whatever it is. It didn't make sense to us because these are really experienced guys. They'd done a lot of shooting, they'd done a lot of skydiving, and certainly it didn't make sense to them because they were like, well, what are you talking about? Well, I'm not bad at this. I've been doing it my whole...
Skills shouldn't even be in the question.
Well, they were, and that's the problem. And so that's when I began to say, well, we need to look more innately at what we're looking for. And so I kind of backed up and I said, okay, let's look at basic SEAL training, which is, BUDS, basic underwater demolition / SEAL training. This is where you have about a 90% attrition rate. And it's a 6-month long course, some of the toughest training in the world. Hell Week is the kind of the famous crucible 5th week of SEAL training, where you go from Sunday afternoon till Friday afternoon and get 2 hours sleep, and they crush you the whole time.
The one we love watching, G.I. Jane and
and all the movies.
Yeah,
it's always featured in the SEAL movies. And that's where you get the most quitters. But I said to myself, listen, over the course of 20 years in the teams, I did hundreds of combat missions overseas, and I did thousands of training evolutions. Right. Well, let me back up. In SEAL training, you spend hundreds of hours running around with big heavy boats on your head, and you spend hundreds of hours PTing with 300-pound telephone poles and all that stuff, and freezing in the surf zone. And then I said, okay, I've done hundreds of missions, I've done thousands of training evolutions. Never on one did I carry a boat on my head or a telephone pole on my shoulder. Right. So why were they doing that? They weren't doing that because they were training us in the skills to be Navy SEALs. They were doing that to tease out qualities to see if we could do the job, if we had the qualities to do the job, not necessarily if we had the skills to do the job. And this is the difference, right? So skills are not inherent to our nature. The difference is this: the skills are not inherent to our nature. We're not born with the ability to shoot a gun or ride a bike or throw a ball. We are taught those things, or we train to do those things. They also inform our behavior in known and specific environments, right? So here's how and when to shoot a gun, here's how and when to throw a ball or ride a bike. Because they're tangible and they're visible, we can see how well anybody does any one of those things. We can measure and assess it. We can say, this is how well. We can just see how well people...
Good, bad, pass, fail,
right.
high, low,
The thing about skills, though, is while they tell us how we're going to perform in these certain environments, they tell us very little, if nothing, on how we're going to perform when the environment becomes uncertain and unknown, because you cannot apply a known skill to an unknown environment. Okay?
Right, yeah.
So in unknown environments, we begin to lean on attributes. Attributes are more innate. Qualities like all of us are born with levels of patience, situation awareness, adaptability, resilience, okay? Certainly they develop over time, but you can see you can see levels of that in small kids, right? Any parents will tell you, okay, I've seen the 1-year-old or the 2-year-old who's very patient and the 2-year-old who's very impatient. I mean, it's innate, right?
Very true, yeah.
They inform our behavior, right, rather than dictate it or direct it. my son's level, or any one of us, or any one of our levels of perseverance and resilience informed the way we showed up when we were learning how to ride a bike. And we were falling off a dozen times doing so. Because they're hidden, because they're kind of in the background, they're very hard to assess, measure, and test. You see them most visibly and viscerally during times of challenge, uncertainty, and stress.
Right, yeah.
Which is why SEAL training was such a perfect laboratory, because SEAL training is all about throwing guys in this environment.
See what we got.
See what we got. But ultimately, what happens is if we understand our attributes, then we start understanding our behavior. Now, the good news is this. We're all born with all of the attributes, okay? The difference in each one of us are the levels to which we have each. So if we take adaptability, for example, I might be a level 8 on adaptability. What does that mean if 10 is high and 1 is low? That means that when the environment changes around me, outside my control, it's fairly easy for me to go with the flow and roll with it, all right?
Okay.
Someone else might be a level 3, which means when the environment changes outside their control, it's difficult for them.
So it's not like one can do it and one can't. It's to what degree
is it easier?
Yeah. What's the spin up?
That's right. How easy or hard? We could say. I mean, adaptability, resilience, all this stuff. So we all have. So you can imagine all of the attributes as a line of dimmer switches on a wall. All right, and each dimmer switch is set to a different level for each one of us, and our lines are all different. That's how we show up. I'm kind of this guy who believes that we, first of all, we're all human. We all know that. We all remember that, right? But we're kind of like cars, okay? Some of us are Jeeps and some of us are Ferraris. Some of us are SUVs. There's no judgment in that because the Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do and the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do, okay? What it would behoove us to do is to look under our hoods and figure out what we are, okay? Because we may, in fact, be a Jeep trying to run on a Ferrari track or a Ferrari trying to run on a Jeep track. Now, again, because we can choose, right? We have the right to choose. We might be a Jeep that decides to run on a Ferrari track, okay? But it's best to know that you're a Jeep so that you can start understanding your performance and understanding what you need to work on so you can better run on a Ferrari track as a Jeep. Gotcha. Or you say, well, actually, I'm a Jeep, and this is why I haven't liked what I'm doing because I'm a Jeep who's supposed to be running on a Jeep track, but I'm trying to run on a Ferrari track. So it's really up to you, but really that core knowledge is one of the first keys to success. And I think that core knowledge begins with understanding our attributes.
What about someone who is in the leadership position, is in the superior role, the manager, the, one step above kind of thing? When we're looking at, clearly this person on my team, this employee, this whoever, is presenting these types of attributes at the high-low dimmer switch. From a leadership position, how do you turn up the dimmer for people when the situation demands it?
Well, so let me get. I'm going to answer that question. Then we have to get back to what leadership actually is. Okay. The cool thing about attributes is that you can develop the attributes you're lower on. Okay. The problem is you can't do it the same way as you can a skill. So I can't tell you, hey, I'm going to. Let me give you a better example here. If, for example, you said, and I wouldn't have to tell you this, but say one of our non-military friends said, hey, I want to learn how to shoot a gun and hit a target, okay, hit a bullseye. You and I know we could take him to the range, and within about 2 hours, we can teach him how to do that, okay? That's a skill, all right? If that same person says, I want to learn patience, we can't teach them how to do that, right? So the quick back-of-the-envelope test on whether or not it's a skill or an attribute, because they get conflated all the time, is to ask yourself, can it be taught or can I teach it? If the answer is yes, it's probably a skill. If the answer is no, it's probably an attribute. So to develop an attribute takes 3 things. It takes self-motivation, right? Self-direction, and then it takes one's deliberate step into discomfort to test and tease that attribute. So if someone wants to develop their patience, for example, they need to be motivated to do it. They need to direct themselves to do it, and then they need to start finding environments inside of which to put themselves so that they may test their patience. Right? So they pick the longest line at the grocery store or whatever, or drive on the 405 at, I would say rush hour, but at any time, right? I mean,
or come to LA anytime.
Come to LA anytime. So you have to pick those environments. So no person in charge can make anybody else develop an attribute. It has to be self-directed, right? But now let's get to leadership, okay? Because I talk about leadership attributes, I talk about team ability attributes, and this is where we get in trouble because we, again, conflate being a leader with being in charge, okay? They're not the same thing. One's a noun.
Please say that again.
That we conflate being a leader with being in charge, and they're not the same thing. One's a noun and one is a verb, okay? Leadership is a behavior. Oh, and by the way, we don't get to self-designate. Okay, we can say I'm in charge, right? And the military can say you're in charge.
Yeah, I can look at your rank. It's pretty clear.
It's pretty clear. In fact, we say there's symbols everywhere to let people know that you're in charge.
Truly.
All right, but you can't say I'm a leader. It's like saying you're you're good looking or funny. Okay, other people decide if you're a leader. Other people decide whether or not they choose to follow you. We all know this intuitively because we all know or have experienced people who are in charge who we don't consider leaders at all, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes in that very same organization, we look at the person who is the farthest from being in charge, and we go to them every time, right? So leadership is about behavior, and how you behave towards another human being allows them to make a decision as to whether or not they choose you as someone who they consider a leader. The attributes that I talk about in the book, the 5 leadership attributes, which are accountability, empathy, decisiveness, authenticity, and one more. See, Anyway, one more are all.
It'll hit you in a second.
It'll hit me, right? But they're all attributes that lead to behaviors that then people have historically seen and thought about as, hey, this person's a leader. Same thing goes with team ability. Okay, there's the team ability attributes are behavior. We don't get to call ourselves a great teammate. We behave in a way that allows our teammates to consider us a good teammate, right? So if you are,
it has to be a name given to us.
That's right. If you are if you are in a position, if you are someone who is in a position where you are in charge, okay, and you want to think about attributes, first think about the attributes of leadership, so that you can then be designated a leader by those who are in your span of care. And then, holistically, you can start asking yourself, okay, as a team, what attributes do we need on this team? And then how do we best develop those or hire for them or whatever?
Which attributes should we lean on if we want to be considered that? If we want others to be looking at us, thinking of us as a leader, as a good teammate? Which attributes can we kind of work on?
Well, so the leadership ones are empathy. Okay, so first is empathy. All right, to feel what another, not just know how someone feels, feel how someone else feels. Right? We all know if someone takes the time to try to empathize with us, we automatically begin to feel cared about. Okay, and if you cared about leadership leadership, one of the first elements of leadership is trust. And when you begin to show someone you care about them, that starts to kind of imbue a trust in there. So showing you care about someone is the first step. So that's why empathy is one of the ones. Authenticity, right? Authenticity, being authentic, being our real selves, whether we're at work, whether we're at home, whether we're out in town, whatever, that shows. I mean, it's very easy to see for people whether or not you're the same person with
True
them.
colors shine through pretty quickly.
That's right. Whether you're the same person with them as you are with, say, someone who's senior to you. So authenticity shows someone whether or not they can trust you and feel that consistency. Decisiveness, that's the one I forgot. Decisiveness, we all know that someone who's able to make efficient and rapid decisions with a responsible amount of information, not too fast, but also not too slow, that imbues trust, right? Accountability, there are no one really, just in our honest truth, do we consider a leader who's always saying it's someone else's fault. It's not me, it's them. It's not me, it's them, and blaming, okay? Ultimately, we don't really think of that person as a leader. We sometimes we just know that. It's just an intuitive thing. If someone's blaming and pushing away, they're not taking accountability, taking responsibility.
That's when we'll throw Jocko's work at them. Extreme ownership.
Yes, that's right.
Really,
it's true. And Jocko has some great stuff about leadership, and that's included, right? Extreme ownership, because if you don't have that, then you're not building trust.
Exactly.
And now I'm blanking on the last one, but just the.
For the consideration of others, what the attributes that we really want to work on most for others to really put us in that light, leadership, good teamwork.
Well, that's what, and I think,
solid two right there.
Well, sure. I think if there was one most important one, if I were to rank them, I tend not to do this, right?
Okay.
but if
people would probably latch onto it.
Well, and they'll latch onto it, and again, we're all different in terms of what we consider important, okay, and how we as human beings I can't tell someone else how they're going to look at someone like a leader.
Yeah.
But I would say authenticity is one of the most important ones because again, if we are showing up the same way for everybody, and again, it doesn't. What's funny about this is it doesn't have to mean you are nice, right? I had a CEO. Most of your audience are military, so they know what change of command is. But for those
when you get a new boss.
Yeah, and it's a ceremony, right? Every 2 years, you get a brand new CO, and you go through this ceremony. And we had this, and I was a young officer, and we had this new CO coming in. And so at the reception afterwards, I went up to introduce myself, and this guy immediately gives me like a cold handshake, and he's like, he starts asking me, like grilling me about some gear that we hadn't, like dive gear we hadn't been using for a while. And I was giving him some rote responses that had been told to me by some senior goons, because I was kind of new to the command, and he was not buying it. He was just like, why, just asking tough questions that were, probably good questions, but I was like, man, this is. So it was about a 2-minute exchange that was very uncomfortable. And I remember walking away saying, man, this is going to be a rough 2 years with this guy, right? And it was only after a couple weeks that I realized he was that way with everybody. I mean, whether it was me, whether it was an enlisted person, whether it was a senior person, whether it was at Chow, PT, in his office, he was always the same way, right?
Wow.
And I remember saying, well, all I need to do is adjust. I could trust his behavior. He was like that all the time. And so I just adjusted. He turned out to be a phenomenal leader because he always asked really hard questions that we should consider. And I thought he was a great leader, And so a few years later, I was assigned to a task force overseas, and I showed up, and it was already running. So I was just showing up to be in a position in the ops department. And I was greeted by this guy. He was the guy I was going to be working for.
No shit.
Yeah. And he greeted me the same way, cold handshake. And he said, hey, I'm glad you're here. I got work that was due yesterday, right? And I felt comfortable. I was like, okay, I know this, right? So
familiar.
Yeah, familiar. So it doesn't have to mean you're nice all the time. It just has to mean you're consistent. And I would say you can't be kind of an a-hole, right?
Sure,
and you have to show that you care, and you have to show this guy. You could tell he cared, and you could tell that he knew what he was talking about. And you could tell the questions he was asking us, even though it was kind of an ornery manner, were good questions. I mean, they really were. They were pushing us to do things that we probably should have been doing anyway. So I think authenticity is probably one of the most important ones. Yeah.
So what happens when shit hits the fan? Rounds are coming down, or the pressure at your job is rising to the top, or home situation is just the boiling point.
Yeah.
Is it, okay, quick, let me go to my Rolodex of attributes. Which one do I like access? How do you advise people to get to a point to where these attributes become innate, become second nature? What's the work, and then how do you go from the work to the application so that it just happens?
Well, the attributes are second nature no matter what. So the first thing I advise is start to understand how you show up.
Okay.
Because when the shit hits the fan, that's when your attribute's going to show up. And it behoove you to know if you're someone who's patient or impatient, if you're someone who's resilient or non-resilient, if you're someone who's adaptable or not very adaptable, right? Because then you start to understand A, how you show up, and B, if there's some gaps. You may then say, gosh, I need to be more adaptable. So you decide to then start working on your adaptability and developing that attribute. However, when stuff happens, like when we start experiencing fear, stress, and anxiety, we start to tickle our amygdalas, right? And so we have to kind of think about this in terms of what fear actually is. First of all, let's think about stress. Stress and anxiety are actually designed to be good, as is fear. Okay, all these things are designed into our system to cue us, right? They're cues to take us, to either make us act or to make us stop and think, okay? So in stress, for example, if you are hungry, you're going to start feeling anxious and agitated and stressed, right? That's to get up and get food, right? If you're lonely and depressed, it's you're feeling that to get up and find companionship. If you're fearful, that's your body cueing you, hey, there's risk here. Think about this, right? So you don't want to. So I always one of my leaders used to say, hey, beware the fearless leader. Because it'll likely get you killed. Okay, do stay away from people who are, quote, fearless. Okay, because what they're doing is they're not able to assess risk responsibly, right? Yeah. So what is fear? Fear is really a combination of two things. It's the combination of anxiety plus uncertainty. Okay, if you have each of those separately, you don't necessarily have fear, right? You can be anxious but not uncertain. This is you're nervous for the presentation that's coming up next week. You know the material, you know where it's going to be. You might have done it before. You're just a little anxious. There's not uncertainty around it. You're just anxious. Not much. There might not be fear there. You can be uncertain but not anxious. Okay, well that's every kid on Christmas Eve. Okay, so there's no fear there. If you combine the two, you start to induce fear. The amygdala starts to get tickled. When the amygdala starts to get tickled in a high zone, right, we start approaching amygdala hijack, where we start acting without thinking. Our frontal lobe, conscious mind, starts coming offline, and we start acting without thinking. That action, especially as we get into that kind of hijack, but that action usually is two things: fight or flight. Right? We've heard this. We've heard freeze, but freeze is really neurologically an oscillation between the two. Either you're kind of deciding. If
I can get on board with that. Yeah, I like that interpretation.
And so quick thing, and this is kind of the argument for courage as an attribute. Courage is your ability to step into fear. When we decide to actually move into our fear, if we're going to decide to fight, which is I'm stepping into my fear, there's a specific switch in your brain that gets clicked. And when that switch gets clicked, we get a dopamine reward, which means we're rewarded for stepping into our fear. Okay, again, by human evolution standards, it's designed for us to be explorers, discoverers, to go find things, to go step outside our comfort zones, right? So it's not necessarily a bad thing to keep on stepping into our fear. We can decide to do that.
Absolutely.
However, to make any decision, you have to kind of have your frontal lobe at least online to an extent, or else you're in amygdala hijack, okay? The way we begin to, especially if things are getting really bad, to start to buy down fear is to buy down either of those two elements or both. Okay. So you can buy down anxiety, for example. Anxiety is really largely internal. Okay, that's how our physiology is responding to fear. Okay, usually heart rate, pupil dilation, things like that. We can do that. We can buy that down by breathing techniques. There's visual techniques we can do. There's a host of different things you can look into that help you calm yourself
to tap into to activate more of that.
Parasympathetic. Parasympathetic. You're shifting from sympathetic to parasympathetic. Okay, so that's buying down anxiety is largely an internal experiment, right, or process. Once you do that to an extent where you have the conscious mind online, then you need to start thinking about buying down uncertainty. Okay, uncertainty is external to us. So
really, yeah.
So there's not much we can do other than to start asking ourselves some very deliberate questions. The first question we can ask ourselves is, what about this environment do I understand? Okay, we'll start to get those answers.
Establish the norms. Establish the familiar.
As we get those answers, we say, okay, what can I control? Out of that stuff I do understand, what can I control? We pick something and we focus on it and we move towards it. And that's, in essence, enacting that courage circuit, right? So we're getting a dopamine reward when we move to it. Whatever we pick has to have meaning to us, and whatever that horizon is, okay? This is the classic way guys get through either boot camp or certainly like SEAL training.
Yeah.
You would basically compartmentalize in a way that allowed you just to think about what you needed to think about in the moment and move to that. And that would change. Sometimes it'd be like, oh, I'm just going to make it to the next meal, or
That's how I made it through boot camp.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
That's right. Or I'm freezing in the surf zone. I remember freezing in the surf zone and saying to myself, well, I'm freezing right now, but soon I'm going to be doing so many push-ups, I'll be boiling hot, right? So I'll just wait till I'm doing push-ups, or vice versa, So it's moving that, and it's kind of setting that horizon and moving towards it and getting that dopamine hit. This is how we step through slowly uncertainty, challenge, and stress. We just continually reset and re-ask that question and just move step by step through these environments and then get through it. Yeah,
I love that. Is it enough for us to go about this on our own, and you have to have a sense of awareness, a high enough sense of awareness to do everything you just said, but then also to take a step back and assess a fair assessment? Is it enough for us to do that, or how could we maybe incorporate outside opinion that actually is going to be a fair assessment?
Yeah, well, I think opinion. I don't know about outside opinion, but
or outside measurement, or something.
Co-misery is very effective, right? To do this with others, this is actually why we create such bonds with people when we move through challenge and stress together, because we're actually supporting each other in this process, and then we're moving together as a team. So this is why you go through SEAL training and you're so bonded with people. Now there are elements of SEAL training that's all on you, right? You can't look to the other guy, and that's by design. It gets so difficult that it becomes only you. And you're the only one who can do it. But many other times, and I think boot camp is a good example of this too, where the team helps you through, right? And you're able to find things to step through because you have the team's support. That and the other big element, which is humor. Okay, and so humor is an attribute. It's a team ability attribute. I threw it in there as a team ability attribute because I've never encountered any high-performing team or high-performing human, that for that matter, that isn't able to laugh, especially when things get tough.
You have to. I'm sure embrace the suck.
Right.
So many times it would just be so miserable.
Yeah.
And then, me or some other jackass, in the team is just, says something that just no one wants to laugh or feel anything right now because you're just hating your life so much.
Right.
But it's like, no, you just lean it, embrace the suck.
Yeah.
You got to laugh about it.
You have to. And so interesting neurology backs us up, right? So when I was in Hell Week, for example, and this happens all the time. You're freezing, you're doing surf torture, which means you're freezing in the surf zone. And the instructor drives a van up onto the beach and gets out with a megaphone and says, "Hey, I got hot chocolate blankets and donuts for anybody who quits right now." Right? It's a survivor thing, right? And
get it. Here's the carrot.
And he got a lot of people quitting, by the way. And I remember him doing that to us. And the guy to my right immediately yells, he's like, "Hey, do you have any chocolate glazed donuts? Because if you don't have any chocolate glazed, I'm not quitting." Right? And he laughs and I laugh, right? And I knew in that moment, I was like, "Okay, I'm going to make it. This is fine," right? I looked to my left, though. The guy to my left wasn't laughing at all. He was lost in his pain. I don't even think he heard the joke, right? He was too lost in his pain. And I remember thinking, this guy's not going to make it. Well, sure enough, within about a minute, he quit.
Wow.
And this is why, okay? When we laugh, it releases 3 very powerful chemicals into our system, 2 neurotransmitters and 1 hormone, okay? The neurotransmitter dopamine, which we've already talked about. Dopamine is this very powerful chemical that tells us this is good, keep going, keep doing this, okay? It's why it's the root of all addiction, right? Addictions stimulate that dopamine response, right? You get a hit of dopamine. You get endorphins, okay? Endorphins are the human system's form of opiates, okay? It masks pain, right? We all know the runner's high. You know, we're endurance creatures, and the body needed ways to kind of make us start feeling okay.
Euphoric sensation.
Euphoric, so we keep on going, right? It masks our pain. So you get a hit of dopamine, you get a hit of endorphins. Those are neurotransmitters. Then you get a hit of oxytocin, which is a hormone known as the love hormone. Okay, oxytocin,
the cuddle hormone.
You get it when human
touch,
hugs, even witnessing or conducting acts of human kindness, of kindness to another human being, or even witnessing those.
Amazing.
Actually starts to induce
those mirror neurons. The brain doesn't really know the difference.
That's exactly right. It starts to induce oxytocin. So when you laugh, you get all 3 of those, all right, into your system. So this is me in the surf zone. Okay, what happened? My buddy makes a joke, right? I get a hit of dopamine. This is like, all right, this is good. Keep going. I get some endorphins in there. This doesn't feel that bad. And I got oxytocin. We're in this together, right? That's why humor is a hack, okay? Humor is a really important and powerful way to help you keep going. A lot of cancer patients will say when they're in treatment, they just focused on like watching funny movies every day, just laughing as much as possible. Yeah. It's because it floods us with very, very powerful and positive chemicals, and so that's why it's huge, and that's why even though you spent 4 years in the Army and I spent 6 years in the Army and I spent 20, some of our best memories are probably just laughing with our buddies, right? Because it was awesome, you know, even though the conditions might have been miserable.
Yeah, I was going to say laughing in horrible conditions or laughing chilling in the barracks or off base or whatever. Yeah, it's so true. Yeah. 20 years as a Navy SEAL in the military, you've gone through a lot. So as much as you can share, I'm curious, what you've been saying has been so valuable so far, but can we get very personal? Can you take us to a moment when you had to immediately just turn on all the switches? You had to fall back on these attributes. You had to just really, figure out your salt, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it was it in that moment that you realized it doesn't matter my skills, it doesn't matter, a lot of these things I've been taught to a certain degree. It matters what I have innately in me and how I can have it come forth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think ultimately that's what SEAL training does to every guy who makes it through, because they put you in such misery and you see people dropping like flies. And so when you get through that, you realize, okay, wait a second. And so I think one of the first times I realized, all right, I'm going to be okay, is when because you have these like sometimes Olympic athletes coming to SEAL training, and they'd be the first to quit, and and so one of the things I loved about SEAL training was it's one of the purest environments I've ever experienced. Probably one of the purest environments that exists out there, because as soon as you get to the beaches of Coronado, right, it doesn't matter. Nothing about where you came from or who you are matters, right? It doesn't matter if you're the top athlete, the valedictorian, the person from the farm, whatever. It doesn't matter what color, what race, what creed, anything. Okay, all it matters is, hey, we're going to throw you in this environment. Do you have what it takes? And I remember when I saw some of these guys floundering who were otherwise studs. Okay, and I realized as soon as I recognized that it wasn't about how many push-ups I could do or how fast I could run, it was just about me gutting it out. I was like, all right, I'm good. I got this. And that's when what I didn't know at the time, because this attribute stuff, I didn't really think through it deeply enough until, I thought about it while I was running training, and that was, 14 years into my career, and then I really thought deeply writing the book 2 years ago, right? But But then I didn't know what was going on. I just knew that, I had what it took. And it was really in the deconstruction process afterward that I started saying, okay, this is what I was applying in those moments. I was applying this compartmentalization attribute, this resilience, this adaptability, the task, you name it, the task or the drive, the narcissism, whatever the attribute is, I was applying this, and this, and that's what got me through. And again, though, it was in the context of SEALs, right? So one of the reasons, so we don't judge attributes in terms of how we show up. If we were to, wherever we fall on that dimmer switch line, right? Yeah. There's no judgment there. Okay, it'd be like judging our hair color. Okay, it's useless. It's just how we show up.
Yeah.
Where we can start to put or prioritize attributes is when we start looking at them in the context of teams, right? Yeah. So in other words, the list of attributes required to be a good Navy SEAL is going to look different than the list of attributes required to be a good nurse or a teacher or a dentist or whatever, you name it, okay? That's when we start putting that together, and then we have to say, okay, given the list I have, given the ones I'm high on, the ones I'm low on, where do I fit? I happened to find a place where I fit, where my attribute list showed up pretty well, right? The guys who didn't make it obviously didn't, right? And hopefully later on they found places. But that's really the project should be for someone. The book is not a book about SEALs. It's not a book about super performers. It's really, the book is about the reader. When someone reads this book, they will learn about themselves. Now, there are some fun, cool SEAL stories and some family stories. I try to pepper it with a bunch of different scenarios. Certainly not all military. But the idea is when you read it, you will learn about yourself. You'll start to say, okay, wait a second. Now I know. Okay, I'm lower on this. That's why I behave the way I do. Got it, right? And that epiphany is actually quite empowering, even if you find out you're low on something. Because I know for me, if I find out I'm low on something, I was like, okay, that's why this is so painful. Right?
Yeah, amazing. I mean, so many people miss that point, and not to cut you off, but I think it's a really important point. Yeah. Is when we realize. We go through the work or we get feedback from whoever, it can come across as I have less than, I've been shortchanged, or I'm not good at this. And it kind of opens up a wound for a lot of people. But certain people, I think more innately have that wide aperture, like you said, and can accept that and see it as, oh, this is the weak link in the chain. Yeah. I know what to fix now, or it's at least a good starting point. How what you just said, how can someone maybe who doesn't have that wide aperture, doesn't have that open-mindedness, like you were talking about earlier, begin to take that as the feedback they need to, not to, I hate to say to fix what's broken, but just to increase that dimmer, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, I'm really a believer in this idea that we all have something to offer. And we all come to this life with certain competencies and certain deficiencies, and we can't control that, right? We are who we are. And I will concede that some people have more. They start with more, not so much deficiencies, but certainly more
room to grow.
More room to grow. Well, I always say this: there are some people.
More switches down.
If you look at and I don't even think it's attribute wise. I think it's just environmental. So I would say this: if we look at Mount Everest, there are some people who are born 10 feet from the peak, just based on who they are. Yeah. Other people are born at base camp. Other people are not even born in Tibet, right? I mean, they have a long way to go. It's a tough road.
They don't even know what Everest is.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough road for them, right? And that's just life, okay? But I am someone who also believes that if we can do the work on self-discovery and figure out our own engines, we all have the same physiology, right? And so we can actually start to ask ourselves the questions on how we can perform better if we understand our engine better, right? So if you're a Jeep, for example, and you don't know it, okay, I mean, there's thousands or tens of thousands of tricks, tips, and hacks to perform better, right, out there. Many of them are great. Some of them are bullshit, but a lot of them are good. The problem is not every single tool works for every single person. Okay,
yeah, it's not meant to.
It's not meant to.
Yeah.
And so if you don't know you're a Jeep, for example, and you try to put a nitrous oxide pack on your engine, you're going to blow the engine, right? So understanding your own engine, understanding where you show up in some of these attributes, will even allow you to pick the right tools to help build your engine better, right? So this is the power of self-discovery. This is the power of self-awareness. So I would definitely offer for people, don't look at it as an exercise to find your deficiencies. Look at it as an exercise to find your makeup, right? Because once you find your makeup, then you know you start to know and be illuminated to those things you can actually add to your engine that will actually work, you know, because there's a lot of tips and tools that won't, you know, but then you say, okay, this is why that didn't work.
Absolutely.
Okay, this tool is going to work for me.
This has been amazing. Kind of getting towards the end, I want to pick your brain a little bit more before we officially wrap up. You were just talking about there are 1,000,001 different things, tens of thousands, tens of millions of things we could do to, biohack, human optimization, data, quantitative self, qualitative feedback, all these things, supplements. What have been some of your key things, key hacks, if you will, that contribute to all the work that we've been talking about? Is it just this one thing in my sleep, or this supplement, or maybe a couple things that just really, really help with the open-mindedness, with the physiological and the psychological adaptation process for these?
Yeah, so I think the hacks have changed as I've gotten older. I mean, certain things that worked. There's certain things that worked before. I mean, again, I think most of my adult life as a SEAL, I was just powering through. I wasn't really looking for a lot of hacks other than just try to eat healthy and if I could. Sleep is certainly one of the most important things. Get enough sleep. As fellow whoopers, we it's just something to monitor. Are we recovering appropriately so our physiology is ready to attack the day? I would say this, and it's going to be a little bit. It's not an attempt to dodge your question, but it's a little bit off the answer, and that is my most important hack for my entire life for me has been self-introspection. Is the ability to stop and take a look inside, live in my head for a while, think about ideas, think about myself, think about how I show up, and really try to dissect a little bit more about myself so I understand my engine better. But also take real pleasure in just turning over ideas and concepts and perspectives and just thinking about them, just spending some time inside my own head, which I know for some people is frightening.
Is probably what we avoid the most.
Right. But again, I think
I've been there. Yeah.
Well, but listen, I think society right now, the way we're set up, especially technologically, encourages us constantly not to do this, right? I mean, you're sitting in the airport, and I mean, say grocery store. If there's more than two people in the line in front of you, you're most likely going to pick up your phone and start looking at your phone, right? I mean, we just see it all the time. We have so many opportunities to escape right now in our lives. We can watch Netflix wherever we are, right?
I heard this term years ago. I love it, called weapons of mass distraction.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And what it's doing is it's taking you out of your own head. Now, escapism on occasion is perfectly okay, and I encourage it, and I do it, right? But I think most of us are often guilty of too much escapism. We don't allow ourselves some quiet. We don't allow ourselves some thought, some thinking. Growing up, I grew up in the 80s, and we used to drive to our vacations. We had 4 kids in the house. My dad wasn't going to buy plane tickets, so we just got in the car and drove. And we didn't have CD players or Walkmans or
monitors in the headrest,
right? And so I used to, for hours upon hours, just look out the window and think and visualize and daydream, And even to this day, I can sit on an airplane and just sit next to the window and do the same thing. And it's an enormously powerful, I think, gift for me, because it's time I can just think, and I guess be with myself. It sounds a little bit new agey, but I think that's a definite hack that people don't realize they have access to immediately.
I mean, anybody who's been tuning into the show for any period of time or follows me online, I'm all for. I've got all my little tips and tricks and hacks and wellness, this and that. But truly, one of the most powerful things I've ever done is just that: is become comfortable with and seek out, and in fact, make time for self, stillness. One of my favorite living authors, Ryan Holiday, his book, Stillness is the Key, is just so profound. I think not only in the lessons and attributes even, but I love how he kind of gives us examples. It can seem like you said, a new age concept, but it is, I think, the most timeless concept. And I love how he gives, I'll make sure to put this down in the show notes for everybody, just examples of call it meditation, call it me time, just any time it's just you and you and your thoughts. I mean, just world-renowned leaders, generals, presidents, artists. The one thing that they kind of like always would fall back on, especially when shit hit the fan, but they also made time for it regularly, was stillness. Yeah. How do I just seek out and get comfortable with and find the answers, and more importantly, the questions that are already here inside me, the head and the heart.
Yeah, and I think just to make sure people aren't who might look at meditation like, ooh, I don't want to do that. I find it's like one of the ways I quote meditate is I go for running. I run.
Yeah.
So I run in the woods.
Walking is mine.
Yeah, in Virginia I run in the woods and I don't time myself. I don't have any headphones. I just run. I enjoy nature. My brain is I'm just thinking. It's time to think. There are neurological there's studies and proof that says that if you are active, if you can keep your body moving to a degree that you don't need to think about it, right? You don't want to be rock climbing complex things and be in la la land. But to the degree that you don't have to think about it, movement actually sparks that type of thought as well. So walking is great, running, whatever it is, getting outside. I mean, some people really enjoy sitting still and meditating, and that's fine if that works. For me, if I can combine some sort of movement, driving for me it's extraordinarily powerful.
I love it
because the long distance drives where I just think, because you don't have to pay. I'm paying attention, but it's not like intense, and I can just be in my head a little bit. Perfect time to, for me at least, to think. So some sort of activity actually induces some of those chemicals that help with that process.
And there's science to it as well. I'm probably going to butcher this reference, but I was reading something, or maybe it was a recent interview, where it's, and that's why they say, the power of walking for physical activity and exercise. They recommend, bare minimum 20 minutes, and then for like actual exercise, I believe 40 minutes. But it's something around that 15, 20 minute mark where it's the gravitational force, basically the gravitational energetic reverb, like the rebounce of when you walk for that amount of time, of actually the shock wave, if you will, of what it does and kind of goes back up to your brain. It only at that point will then begin to kind of trigger this, biochemical response. Again, I'm probably butchering this, but I know I didn't make up most of that.
I believe it.
But there's a science to this. And so whether it's just because you made time for stillness and that's how you get what you need out of it, or the biochemical response, the neuroscience response, it all kind of blends in.
Yeah, totally. I believe it. I know when I'm running there's a point at which I'm warming up, but then my brain just starts really clicking. But the key is just take some time to put away distractions as much as the phones, the beeps, the buzzes, the bings. If you can get out in nature, even better, right? Because then you're connected and it feels that way. You're getting fresh air, and if you can move, I think that's really quite powerful.
Well said. Well, Rich, I've really enjoyed this, man. Thank you so much for your time and your work and your service as well. So the last question I ask everybody, I shared with you the origin story earlier, and a military guy hopefully can appreciate it more. It goes way back to our time before even technically a country of ever forward, live a life ever forward. The live a life part I added on, but what does that mean to you? How does that fall on you? How would you say that you live a life ever forward?
For me, that means constantly moving out towards my edges. So I'm really fascinated with human potential, and potential by definition is always in front of us. It's what could be, not what is. And I think that to move, we all have kind of a ring of comfort around us, and to explore our potential, it requires us stepping outside that ring of comfort and looking at what that next edge is, and going to that next edge. You could call it a horizon too. We're going to move to that next horizon, and it takes courage and it takes a little bit of discomfort. But as soon as you get to that as soon as you get there, you've reached a new edge. You've discovered something new. But guess what shows up? The next edge,
the next
right?
one.
And so I think ever forward for me is consistently seeking edges. Moving out to an edge and then finding it, then take the next edge. And I think that's growth. I truly believe that that's how we live as long as possible. But any person who's lived a long life, a long happy life, even as an old person, they will say, just always be curious, always be discovering, always be moving forward, always be doing something. Just don't stop, and don't give up. And I think that's what that means for me.
Yeah, truly. There's never a right or a wrong answer, so I appreciate that interpretation. I'll, of course, have all of your information down in the show notes for everybody, but if they want to connect with you right now or get the book, where can they go to learn more about what you got going on? Yeah,
best place is theattributes.com, the website. You can learn more about the book. You can get the book. You can take. I have free assessment on there, too.
Oh,
so
great.
You can take an assessment on your grit attributes, your mental acuity attributes, and your drive attributes, and get a score as to where you sit on those. Now, caveat is that data was collected by getting a bunch of data around the world, so about 1,000 plus people. So when you get that score, it's a comparison. First of all, you should take the assessment and really think about it as you take it. It's supposed to be introspective. So would recommend, you don't have to, would recommend reading the book and then taking the assessment.
Okay.
You don't have to do it in that order, though. When you take it, though, think about the answers, and then when you get that score, just know that it's a comparison to 1,000 other people, and say to yourself, okay, what does that mean? Does that mean something for me? Is that fairly accurate? Or if it doesn't feel accurate, say, okay, well, let me index that against some previous challenge, certainty, and stress, and see if it makes sense. It may not. That comparison may not. But yeah, they can take the assessment there. Have some workbooks on there. People can have tools on how to develop attributes. Also on Instagram and LinkedIn and
all the usual.
Yeah, all the usual. But you can find all that stuff from the website.
Amazing.
So theattributes.com. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, again, it was my pleasure, man. Thank you so much for your
Chase.
time.
Appreciate
I'll
it.
end it with go Army, beat Navy.
Whatever.
I don't watch any sports, so it doesn't matter to me anyway. Well, beautiful, man. I'll kill it there. Thank you again so much.